Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, Princess Alexandra had to deal with an ex-mistress of her husband. She was also worried about her brother, who was king of Greece, and having problems with war from an invading country, and the death of her longtime friend William Gladstone. So let's see what she's up to today. Affairs in Greece continued to alarm the princess. She was worried about her nephew, Prince George, who had been appointed High Commissioner in Crete. Balkan troubles were overshadowed by the growing threat of war in South Africa, and the African War broke out in October of 1899. The princess was concerned about the sick and the wounded. On December the 12th, 1899, the princess, according to Dame Beryl Oliver, wrote in the British Red Cross in Action, she decided to pick out 12 nursing sisters to South Africa, and from this small beginning sprang the body afterwards known as Queen Alexandra's Imperial Nursing Service. Later on, she sent out a further 20 of her military nurses at her own expense, though she complained she was not allowed to pick out her own nurses. A hospital ship was also brought out for the balance of funds collected in the princess's name during the Egyptian campaign. She took a deep interest in this. She inquired whether there was to be a chaplain on board and demanded to know why there was no navigating officer. How can they do without a navigating lieutenant? To me, who has been so much at sea, it seems quite impossibility. She herself ordered special mattresses for the bunks, and she greeted with enthusiasm the arrival of several cases of champagne. As for the champagne, I'm sure it will be the most welcome gift for the poor wounded officers who generally live upon it at home. The hospital ship was named Princess of Wales, and it set sail for Cape Town, where she saw much useful service. In the spring of 1900, anti-British feeling in France was so pronounced the prince decided to cancel his Easter holiday on the Riviera to go with his wife to Copenhagen. As their train was standing in the Brussels railway station, a youth called Sapito fired a shot through the carriage window, and the bullet passed straight between the prince and princess. There was no time for anyone to be frightened except the princess's little Chinese dog, who was terrified by the explosion, wrote Charlotte Knowles, who had also been in the carriage. The prince never even changed color, and the princess behaved beautifully. On the 30th of July, the prince's brother, Alfred, now Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, died of cancer. At Friedrichshof, his sister, the Empress Frederick, was slowly and painfully dying of the same disease. In August, when on her way again to Denmark, the princess visited her sister-in-law. "God bless you, darling," she wrote on leaving, "and may you suffer less, as a prayer of your loving sister Alex." In October, yet another blow fell. Prince Christian Victor, the only son of the Prince and Princess Christian, died of enteric fever in South Africa. Painfully tired, unable to either eat or sleep, Queen Victoria struggled on for a few months. The end, however, was near, and on the 15th of January, the princess found herself hurrying to Osborne, where she joined her husband, summoned hastily from London. The Kaiser, subdued and very much on his best behavior, arrived on the 20th of January. 2 days later, in the dusk of the winter evening, Queen Victoria died, surrounded by her family, the princess kneeling beside her and holding her hand. The Prince of Wales was king at last, and the princess queen consort, a title she disliked and refused to use. "She means to be the queen," wrote Lord Esher. It was King Edward's great misfortune that he had had to wait so long for his inheritance. Not until the age of 59 could King Edward begin the real business of his life, and he was to die before his 69th birthday. Fate allotted him nearly 60 years of expectancy for less than 10 of fulfillment. Because of his mother's refusal to associate him in any way with her work as sovereign, those years had not been a time of active apprenticeship, but of empty waiting. Now, in the late middle age, he had to see about learning the difficult trade of kingship. For him, Queen Victoria's death meant a radical alteration in the pattern of his life, but his wife, the change was not so clearly marked. The difference in the position of Princess of Wales and a queen consort is not one of kind, but of degree. Queen Alexandra's duties would still be social and charitable ones, and her new dignity did not mean that she wouldn't have any closer connection with affairs of state. Queen Alexandra's duties would still be social and charitable ones, and her new dignity did not mean that she would have any closer connection with the affairs of state. Nevertheless, she had her own personal contribution to make to the Edwardian conception of monarchy. Queen Victoria had done very much to raise the standing of the throne in popular estimation. Perhaps never before in English history had the monarch been so respectable and respected. However, when she died, she was an old lady of 81 who had lived for many years secluded from her people, a revered but distant figure. Inevitably, the monarchy had come to be regarded as old-fashioned and a bit stuffy. It was for the new king to let in some fresh air, to throw the shutters open on the light of the common day. This was his great achievement, and some of the credit for it must, in fairness, be given to his wife. His popularity fluctuated wildly, not hers. Long ago the nation had taken her to its heart, and through all the changes of fortune, she had never lost her hold upon the affection of the people. Everybody loved not only the masses, but also the intellectuals with whom she had little in common, and the older aristocracy, who were the last people to be dazzled by the glamour of royalty. Had she ever shown resentment to her husband, his affairs would have been much more disastrous and had an effect upon his popularity. Because she accepted them without question, the nation was prepared to accept them also for her sake. Nevertheless, they presented a stumbling block. Although some people might like King Edward better for what Wilfrid Blunt called his pleasant little weaknesses, a large section of the population, and one that was growing every day more influential, remained completely out of sympathy with his attitude toward life. Whatever their own private behavior may have been, men of the industrial generation demanded that the morality of public characters should be above reproach. Although everybody loved King Edward for his panache and delighted to see the monarchy take on new shape, better suited to the 20th century, the main street, and more especially the men in the streets of the northern cities, demanded that the sovereign should continue to uphold a 19th century standard of morals. This, of course, King Edward could not and would not do. He was no hypocrite, and he would not pretend to be any more moral than he actually was. It was left for Queen Alexandra to preserve for the throne its aura of Victorian respectability, without in any way detracting from its new, more decorative Edwardian air. She proved in her own person that royalty could be both glamorous and good. She eased the transition from the old to the new, because men of both worlds could find her the qualities that they had sought for in a queen. She was the smartest of all the Edwardian beauties, and yet as virtuous as Queen Victoria, combining the more free and easy manners of a new generation with a beauty and queenly stateliness, and she was at once both dignified and approachable. Her remarkable beauty was, of course, one of Queen Alexandra's greatest assets. Simply to look at her was a rare pleasure. Those who saw her at the state opening of King Edward's first parliament never forgot her appearance. Dressed in the deepest mourning, her fair complexion set off by a heavy black veil, surmounted by a miniature diamond crown. A spectator at the 1906 state opening, when asked 60 years later to describe the Queen's appearance, simply replied, "She was the most beautiful person I ever saw." In 1906, Queen Alexandra was already 62. As late as 1909, Margot Asquith could write, "The Queen, dazzlingly beautiful, whether in gold and silver by night or in violet velvet by day, succeeded in making every other woman look common beside her. Lovely and gracious, so beautiful with her sly, sideways look, ineffably beautiful. Slender, graceful, and beautiful, these are only some of the innumerable expressions of admiration lavished upon Queen Alexandra in her 60s. Queen Alexandra's letters reflected the life and thought of the typical Edwardian society lady. She read the same books, enjoyed the same plays, held the same views of life in general, as did most of her fellows. Had she been more serious and intellectual, preferring George Moore to Marie Corelli, Bernard Shaw to Pinero, she would not have personified as well as she did the Edwardian ideal of womanhood. Queen Alexandra enjoyed her position, although to old friends such as Lady Macclesfield, she made the usual conventional remarks about preferring a peaceful life and a more private station with a heavy heart. I have to lead this new life with all its many responsibilities. While Queen Victoria was still unburied, she refused to allow herself to be called queen and forbade anyone to kiss her hand. Her grief was a perfectly honest emotion. She had been genuinely fond of her mother-in-law, and at the private service of committal at Frogmore Mausoleum, she was the only person, except for the very young and impressionable Duke of Coburg, who could not refrain from tears. There was a real affection between them, but the situation had not always been an easy one. For 38 years as Princess of Wales, Alexandra had lived under the tremendous shadow of Queen Victoria. Now at last she came out into the sun. She had always deferred to the Queen's approval and the Queen's wishes. Lord Esher stated as Princess of Wales, she was never, so she says, allowed to do as she chose. Now I do as I like, the sort of attitude. With her husband's ascension, a subtle change came over Queen. Sir Philip Magnus writes of her willful and charming way. From now onwards, she does not cease to be charming, but her willfulness grows more and more apparent. She becomes, it must be said, a little spoiled. Nobody knew what was the correct dress for the Queen Consort to wear at the coronation. The last Queen Consort had been Queen Adelaide, and only the Grand Duchess Augusta had any clear recollection of King William IV's coronation. Historians were consulted, records were turned up, but Queen Alexandra cared for none of these things. Where clothes were concerned, she would bow to neither the dictates of history nor the demands of fashion. I, now better than all the milliners and antiquaries, she wrote to Sir Arthur Ellis, I shall wear exactly what I like, and so will all my ladies. Basta. I looked that word up and it just said, it just is. So I'm going to end the video here. Once more, a lot of things were happening in the life of Princess Alexandra. There was a war in Africa, and she got nurses to go help the wounded and sick there. And there was also a ship that was purchased from funds collected in her name during the Egyptian campaign, and that sailed to Africa too. In Brussels, her and her husband barely escaped being shot while in their carriage. The bullet went right between them. And the next event was life-changing. Queen Victoria died, and that meant her son became king, and Princess Alexandra became Queen Consort. Queen Alexandra then became a bit more free. She no longer had to deal with Queen Victoria on her request. All the same, she confided to close friends that she longed for a more peaceful life with less responsibilities. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.